anyone familiar with Donella Meadows and her work on systems change? Okay, she's sort of the, I think, originating guru or lead thinker on systems change. This Thinking in Systems, a Primer, is a great resource. She defines systems change, or as a system, as a set of things, people, cells, molecules, or whatever, interconnected in such a way that they produce their own behaviour over time. The language that I was introducing is, instead of talking about organisations in systems change or systems thinking and collaboration, we were bringing in the language of actors, because it's more than institutions. There's community members, community groups, businesses, so trying to find a more collective term, and that they're interconnected, and that the way they operate now has a set of patterns. They work together, or that they behave together, that produces a set of outcomes, a way of working and a set of outcomes. The art and science of systems change is observing the dynamics between the actors and the behaviours they exhibit, and trying to change, coming up with hypotheses that would change that behaviour. How do systems change? They change by changing the patterns within the system. It is a really important skill of doing systems change, and I would say of doing collaborative practice when you're convening the whole system, to be able to diagnose system dynamics or systems patterns. It's a core skill. And we're operating in complex environments, in the systems that are ever changing and evolving. The best we can do is form a hypothesis based on the data we have, the knowledge, our own role in the system, the perspectives and opinions of others, their experience of the system. So we form a hypothesis that says, where is the best place that we should try and shift this pattern or behaviour? And you can come up with lots of hypotheses. In fact, it's very good practice to come up with multiple hypotheses. And then say, of these ones we've generated, what is the most high leverage place to intervene that we're now going to go and test? And then so that's the prioritisation. And then you implement the test into the system, and you watch to see, do the behaviours and patterns change in a way that is supportive of the impact you're trying to create. So what you're trying to do is create a new set of patterns or a new set of behaviours across actors in the system towards the impact of your common agenda, or towards the impact you're trying to create. So where are the high leverage intervention points? There's a narrative about systems being broken. You hear that all the time, the system's broken. There is another narrative that is the system is operating exactly as it's designed. I think it's a much more powerful narrative, because we are all actors within the system. We're all contributors to the way the system is operating now, the behaviours and patterns within it. And if we say the system is operating exactly as it's designed, then we have the power to change it. So the types of things that people often look at when they're looking at systems change are structures. So this is governance structures, or organisational structures, or structures within communities that are sort of traditional structures. Flows of anything, the way information flows, the way ideas and knowledge flow, the way funding flows. Rules. Now, we often describe the rules of the system as, I'm funded to do this. That's a really strong rule in the system. Or delegated authority came up earlier. That's a rule in organisational systems. So there's lots and lots of rules. Many of them are explicit, like KPIs and funding contracts, and then there's a whole bunch of rules that are implied or sit below the surface. They're not named. You only find out if it's a rule when you infringe it. Another leverage point is the power to evolve, that the system, it's connected to what I was saying earlier, that the system's operating exactly as it's designed, so therefore you can change the design of the system. And now this is, to me, the core promise and proposition about self-determination, that the system can self-organise. So community members can self-organise and assume power and change the structures, the flows, the way the rules happen. If that to me, that is a great promise of this power to evolve, that there's this self-organising property within systems that can change the way they operate. So a big one we've been talking about is goals, visions, shared purpose. Aligning lots of different actors in the system to shared goals is systems change in and of itself. And then the biggest one of all, I think, is changing the way people think, the mindsets of people in the system, and those that have more power and more influence, including informal power and influence, changing the way they see the challenge, the context or the opportunity is one of the biggest keys to getting systems change. We all operate with assumptions. We all hold up a set of way of working or a set of rules based on our assumptions and our beliefs and our values. That if we can collectively change or challenge those assumptions and shift many people's worldview at the same time, then we will change all of these things together. The goals, the structures, the flows, the rules, and the power to evolve, because we're changing people's minds first. So here's another way of looking at it, trying to put systems change more into a theory of change or a logic flow. That there are really clear drivers of systems change. Some of the ones up there are the ones from the previous slide, but some of them are new. So the way communications and information flows, policy and regulations, that's some of the rules of the system. Competencies, so increasing people's skill set and confidence is a driver for systems change. Relationships, level of trust. Resource flows, structures, the way ideas and knowledge are generated and whose ideas and knowledge is preferenced over another or over others, and the way people use authority. So those drivers shift behaviour, shift the way actors in the system interact with each other. What we're trying to do through collaboration is shift the behaviours of many actors concurrently at the same time, because that is the hypothesis, is theory of change is that is the key to large-scale population improvement. At a program level, so here's our overall strategy. If we go program-level interventions, which is going on the top of the slide, we get very tangible, immediate results for small numbers of people, those that interact with our program. And they're needed, they teach us things, but the number of people they reach is invariably quite small. And they provide only a small contribution to population level change. But if your strategy has systemic interventions in them as well, they're much broader. They are less direct in that they don't have a neat number of people that are turning up and getting a dose of your program, and they take much longer to play out. But if you've formed a really good hypothesis and you've tested your high leverage interventions really well, and now you're implementing them at scale, then you're changing the very way the system operates, you're changing the conditions within which the problems arise, and that leads to population level change. It's a much larger contribution to transformational change or large scale impact. Now we need programs to teach us what works and what doesn't work and to inform systemic interventions, but programmatic interventions alone will not be sufficient. There's a number of ways, this is sort of process ways to look at systems change. Some of the other ones that are learnable, as in there's a huge amount of resources available, is the adaptive cycle. Theory U, taught out of MIT, is I think one of the largest online MOOCs. Last time they ran, it's a free course, last time they ran it I think it was 58,000 people globally participate in it. And it is a process for how to learn how to facilitate taking large groups of people through systems change processes. And sustainability transitions theory, which comes out of the environmental movement. There's no one way to do this. These are just tools or approaches that will inform your own practice and what works in your context. All of them have a shared set of, if you look at all of them individually, the different approaches, they all have core things that are the same, and these are they. Understand needs and assets, engage broadly diverse stakeholders across the system, map the system together, so build shared understanding of context, distribute leadership, so have leadership happening in many parts of the system, because you need many actors to change their behaviour or change the rules or change their structure, and foster a culture of learning, not just a culture of accountability. And the learnings from doing this work is intentionally step into how complex it is. Don't shy away from it. Step into and showcase and highlight that adaptation is part of it, this whole test and try experimental approach that fundamentally challenges, for example, the way we contract for programs. They are not test and try, they are highly static. So you've got to lean into that, the fact that you're working against the status quo. Build the evidence base of progress and impact over time. You know, there's this whole thing about how do you do collaborations of coalitions or collaborations of collaborations, and I wonder if that is a relevant conversation for the SDG. Obviously engage government, because some initiatives don't think to do that. Some initiatives don't do that because it's a belief that government is too constrained to work in complexity. And shift systems with humility is another principle of the work, as in ecosystem leadership over ego. Have you heard that one? Like, ego leadership is that hero organisational leadership. Ecosystem leadership is how do we lead for the whole, the good of the whole. Many of the skills we've touched on over the last 2 days. Adaptive leadership, this again is very learnable. Adaptive leadership's principle is every one of us lead to drive systems change. There are fantastic books published on adaptive leadership out of Harvard. Systems thinking, which we've covered some of. Partner recognition, and we can do some of that when we talk about how to get started. Collaborative design, we've covered some of today. The how of convening, which is one of the questions that's emerged. And the skill of how to facilitate people through learning, particularly experts who think they don't have much to learn. Understanding innovation processes, which we used as a how to develop the common agenda, and the use of real-time data feedback loops. So you only learn if you get a feedback loop, but we don't build that into, usually we don't build that into programs, so we have to build it into our processes for systems change. How do you constantly get regular real-time feedback from how is the system operating now? What are the rules that are in place now, and have we shifted the ones we intended to shift? And of course, we've talked about it regularly, you can't communicate enough, and you need to use communications as part of your strategy, not just a function of keeping everyone informed. It's part of the behaviour change you're trying to elicit.